Thank you for downloading from Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. Support for this podcast comes from your generous gifts and donations. You can find out more about Ravi Zacharias and the team at www.rzim.org.
I've made the comment that they will say all religions are fundamentally the same, superficially different. It is the reverse that is true. They are at best superficially similar, but fundamentally different.
Welcome to another Friday Q&A here on Just Thinking. Are all religions basically the same? Don't they all just provide different paths to the same end? Does absolute truth exist, or is everything relative? For some, truth is as clear as black and white. For others, it's somewhat gray. And for a few more, the idea of truth doesn't even register. Where do you fit in? RZIM team members Allison Thomas and Stuart McAllister join Ravi Zacharias as they answer these questions and examine the necessity for truth. Here's part one of the Q&A session held at Woodmen Valley Chapel in Colorado Springs. Let's listen in.
How do you respond to someone who says that all religions are basically the same? I mean, what really differentiates Jesus from Buddha, Muhammad, or other religious figureheads? The notion of all paths as long as they get to the top of the mountain to where God is, it doesn't matter what path you take. What approach should a person take in answering that question if they're a follower of Christ, or if they're not a follower of Christ? What differentiates between?
What they're doing is they're comparing it on the common denominator of the moral law instead of doctrine. But you don't compare religion based on the moral law. You compare religions on doctrine. And when you do that, you find that they're completely different when it comes to the origin of humanity, the nature of sin, the nature of salvation, the afterlife. Those minor little things, if you throw away all those things, then they're exactly the same. But so I would say the easiest thing and the first thing to do would be explaining the tendency to point to the moral law, which is written on all of our hearts. That explains why there's a similarity, and instead looking to doctrine.
I agree with that. I think that we do that, as we were saying, by comparison. I mean, it's easy to make a statement like that when you've never actually looked at any of the religions in question. A superficial exploration of Islam and Buddhism would show that they're not anything like at all. They're very different, both in the questions they ask and how they answer them. But when you run through the rubric of the kind of core questions about the nature of ultimate reality, what's wrong with the world, how do we fix it, that's where you see the real differences, and the differences make a difference. We have to move back to the bigger question that's being asked by all religions. And so indeed you would expect that many different attempts to answer those questions would come from different parts of the world. That itself, I think, is explained within the Bible. As people go from the answers that was given, the miraculous revelation of God, reject that, then they have to turn to other sources. But I think comparison is definitely the method. And as Alison said, the doctrines are a clear way to show what they talk about ultimate reality, about what's wrong with life, and how they answer it, and how well do they measure up to criteria. Does it fit? The worldview test questions that we talked about earlier on.
I've made the comment that they will say all religions are fundamentally the same, superficially different. It is the reverse that is true. They are at best superficially similar, but fundamentally different. I just tell the person, you're being very disrespectful to all of the religions of the world because none of them would agree with you. Buddha rejected Hinduism because he rejected the Vedas. He rejected the caste system. Muhammad rejected the historic creeds of the Christian faith, the death, and Islam rejects that Jesus even died on the cross. They say they just thought he died. He didn't actually die. Somebody put Judas in his place to look like him, and they think Jesus actually died. This kind of stuff. So it is possible that all of them are wrong. It is just illogical that all of them are right. You have to weigh them against the truth, and they show complete disrespect. Now, the one religion, Baha'ism, tries to tell us that they're all saying the same thing and they're all inclusivistic. But Baha'ism also excludes the exclusivists, and in that sense becomes exclusivistic itself. So you really cannot make that statement without violating all of them in the process. And she's right. The truths that emerge have to be compared, and Stuart has reinforced that idea. We have to examine the fundamental questions that they've answered.
Well, in dealing with that, following along regarding what truth is and how can we be so certain that objective, absolute truth actually does exist? And even if absolute truth does exist, how do we know for sure that the truth is when we are situated beings with our own presuppositions? How do we determine and discern between the absolutism of truth and our own preferences as well as our presupposition? How do we engage with moral relativists?
I think there's an enormous confusion in our culture between the existence of truth and how we know what truth is. So one deals with the reality of the nature of truth and reality of the world as it is, and is there independent objectively of what I know or not, and my ability to know that. I think every philosophical and spiritual person admits that the one is easier to sort of state, the second is harder to define. So I can say truth exists. Now, for instance, if I'm dealing with reality and I say the reality of the stool, I can touch it, feel it, sense it, kick it, and find out that there's a realness to it. Now, to try and demonstrate and defend that sometimes becomes sometimes a bit of the challenge. But what I find often with the relativist person is they make a jump that because we can't capture by definitional terms exact expressions, therefore truth doesn't exist. But that's to confuse again how we know with what we know. I think the fact is even the relativist, as we've said earlier, a person said there's no such thing as truth, has to employ the very thing. They have to mean it is true that there is no such thing but truth. But if it is true that there is no such thing, what are we saying? Either saying nothing or we're just confused. And so I think the independent nature of reality, its existence, is undeniable. The knowing process, how do we go through that? I'll pass that to one of my two colleagues so I don't hog this.
A part of the question was defining truth, and one way to start when answering that question is to say that is a correspondence view of truth, which says that truth is what corresponds to reality. And if anybody objects to that, you can say that any attempt to deny the correspondence view of truth uses the correspondence theory of truth in saying that their view corresponds to reality and your view does not. And so they cannot deny that truth exists, and with what Stuart was saying, also that it can be known. Those are two separate questions. So first, defining what truth is, showing that any other attempt to define truth in any other way, that you cannot know it. Like truth is what coheres, or truth is what is comprehensive, or truth is what feels good. Any of these other attempts to define truth all point back to the correspondence theory that says you cannot deny that it exists, and then knowing it is a separate question.
And the flip side of that, just as they've answered, the flip side of that is examining relativism. So if relativism says that all truth is relative, that statement either includes itself or excludes itself. If it includes itself, that means that statement is also not always true. But if it includes itself, then it's denying an absolute while positing an absolute at the same time, so it self-destructs. Relativism simply cannot be true because of the very nature of the law of non-contradiction. Now, when we were at the University of Washington, a young woman stood up and she said, I have read the Bible, I am not a Christian, I don't find the Bible exciting at all, but I'm a very spiritually minded young woman. What is wrong with my spirituality? Why do I have to become a Christian? And I began my talk, interestingly enough, with a story. Let me get back to her question and the way I worked backwards. I said, if I woke up one morning and told my wife that I have now begun to worship the green cheese goddess, and I buy green cheese anywhere I can find it and offer sacrifices to the green cheese goddess, and I'm going to go around the globe propagating the reality of the green cheese goddess. The only problem with the green cheese goddess is as soon as anybody else wants to get in touch with the green cheese goddess disappears. But you have to take my word for it, that the green cheese goddess exists. I said, if I told my wife that every morning that I'm going to go to a temple to worship the green cheese goddess, what do you think she would do with me? One of them is to have my head examined, wondering why is this green cheese goddess the focus of my life? And she nodded. I said, now I take you back to an opening illustration I gave you. The opening illustration was a trial of two young girls, minors, who were accusing a man of raping them in England. My wife, my children, and I were all attending that trial, and the two gals weren't there. They could only be seen on monitors. And we saw the man being accused, and we were described what happened. The girls said on this particular day, they walked into their home, and it was bizarre, it was horrific, and I kept looking at that man and saying, what kind of a human being is he? The defense attorney stood up after the lengthy arguments, and he looked at the gals on the monitor and said, I just want one question answered, one thing known, nothing more. I just want to know the truth. Do you understand me? I don't want you to tell me long stories. I don't want to make it difficult. I just want to know one thing. What is the truth? Do you want girls understand me? He said, yes. So my questions now are these. If you don't understand them, stop me. Is it true that you told your parents of what happened 2 months after it happened? Pause. Yes. In the 2 months, did anybody examine you physically to find out what had happened before the 2 months or after the 2 months? No. And he went through a series. Now, is it true that on the day you told your parents, he'd seen you in the heart of the city that day doing something that you ought not to have been doing, and he told you he was going straight to your parents at the end of the day to tell them what he saw you doing? Is it true? One of them remained silent. The other one said, I can't remember. And the story began to unfold, and the case began to implode under its own weight. There were 2 of us men, 4 of us women who walked out of there, and all 6 of us said one thing. What really happened that day, we don't know. And I said to her, is it important that that courtroom know the truth of what happened on that day? She said, yes. It is equally important and infinitely more important that your spirituality be based on truth and not just on fanciful imagination. She nodded and accepted. Truth is the most valuable thing in the world. It's the most valuable thing in the world. And once you know the truth, Jesus said, it'll set you free because you can correspond to reality as it really is.
To order a complete copy of this message, call us at 1-800-448-6766. Be sure to ask for the title Woodmen Valley Chapel Q&A. You can also order online at rzim.org, or for those listening in Canada, that website is rzim.ca. The ministry of RZIM specializes in evangelism through apologetics. And if you'd like to find out how you can help support our efforts, be sure to call us or visit our website.
We actually have 4 distinct arenas that we primarily do our evangelism, and then of course, in addition to those 4, we are always wanting to be strong in our churches as well. But it is in the academic arena, in the business arena, in the political arena, and in the arts. These 4 institutions shape the way a culture forms its ideas and values.
What is so unique about the Bible? Why is the Bible our unique hold and revelation of truth, as opposed to some of the other holy books?
I think there are many different ways in which the Bible is unique. One is both in the coherence of the story, given the time factors in which it was authored. When you look at the enormous time gaps between the early parts of the Bible and then the final conclusion of the pieces of the New Testament, and yet you find, particularly if you look at it through a literature mode, the coherence of a narrative story that flows through it. It's quite spectacular that someone, a little book like Ruth, connects into something like the Gospel of Matthew, or the story of Exodus connects into the book of Romans. And you find people without correspondence with each other who are writing and yet captured ideas, concepts, and a cosmology of history. So I think that the uniqueness of the scripture is that, unlike the Quran, where you have this series of one person author and a series of fragmentation aphorisms dictated as far as, well, at least through the one voice, but then under critical studies it looks like it comes from many different sources. There's not that the coherence, the connection of the story and the narrative, the seamlessness from such diverse authors in different locations, in different time spaces. So I think that's one dimension. There are many, many others.
Adding on to that, along the same lines, referring to this unity amidst diversity. I was a lit major in college, studied literature, and when you look at the different genres of literature you find in the Bible, there's apocalyptic literature, didactic literature, history, poetry, allegory, parable, all kinds of literature, a great variety that's shown, and yet they're interwoven together, intensely unified, and still maintain one central theme, and that's salvation, and one problem, and that's the sin that we find in humanity, and one Savior that's anticipated in the Old Testament and revealed in the New. So we see that beauty of unity amidst diversity among the different literary genres and theme.
I think as you add the list of many, it's the only worldview, and Stuart dealt with the worldview issue, the only worldview that answers life's four fundamental questions with correspondence and coherence: origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Islam has made such inroads into the world. But when people tell you, for example, Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world, it isn't. Be sure it isn't. I said this to the Grand Mufti in Jerusalem, and I thought he was going to lop my head off. I said to him, it is not. I said it is the fastest growing enforced religion in the world. I said, take your foot off the necks of the people and then give us the statistics and we'll find out. May not have been very polite, but it was true. You have to find out what it is, why it is that's being followed. The second thing I want to say about Islam is this: they do not even allow you to critique their scriptures. How can you critique the Quran when you don't know Arabic? You are eliminated from the playing field. You cannot take a religion seriously that doesn't even allow you to critique its authority. And if it wants to be taken seriously in the world of the academy, then it must allow its scriptures to be analyzed by its own scholars. But anytime their own scholars analyze it, they vanish from the face of the earth. In my book, Light in the Shadow of Jihad, I've listed 6 of them who just disappeared. The Bible allows you to study, to scrutinize. And the rock musician I quoted, why do we never get an answer when we're knocking on the door with 1,000 million questions about hate and death and war? That song ends by saying, I'm looking for someone to change my life. I'm looking for a miracle in my life. Interestingly, his questions dealt with propositions. His answer came into a relationship. And the Christian faith is the only one that offers you that relationship with the only one who lived without sin. You can be sure what's happening. They hit us with the cosmological attack. They hit us with the design attack. And there was nothing left for them to hit except this one major argument, the moral argument. And so they thought if they could make Jesus look immoral or like you and me, they'd knock off every argument. But the life of Christ was spotless. The thief on the cross says, this man has done nothing amiss. Pilate says, I find no fault in this man. Jesus looked and said, which of you convinces me of any sin? Never a life lived like his. Put it alongside any of the other founders of any major faith, you will find there is no life like that of Christ. And he offers a relationship with God through himself. That is a very unique offer in the world of faiths and the world of worldviews.
Absolutely. In line with that, there was a gentleman who asked, he said, my son has said, I will wait to see who wins, God or Allah, before I make up my mind. What would you say to a father who's wanting to nurture and disciple and lead his son?
Well, the first thing I'd want to know if he really was being serious, or was he just saying this in some cavalier way? So I would ask him a lot of questions. I would ask him what he knows about Allah and what he knows about God. First of all, in the Arabic, it's the same word. It's not a different word. So what he's really talking about is the attributes of the God of the Judeo-Christian faith vis-a-vis the attributes of the Allah presented in the Quran. And if he is really serious, then I would say to him, why don't you evaluate the 2 attributes and you tell me which one coheres with a righteous, moral, loving first cause? For example, can the Quran be true when it denies the crucifixion of Jesus? When Jewish historians, Roman historians, Greek historians, pagan historians, all historians agree on the crucifixion of Jesus. And the Quran denies that he was even crucified. Where was Muhammad after he died? Where was Jesus after he died? One atheist wrote recently that he's dancing on the grave of God. Well, he can dance on the grave of the Christian God. There's nobody there. He rose again from the dead. The whole nature of the two divine entities presented is very different. And I could go into a lot of detailed description here. But let me just tell you one story that'll thrill your heart. And I hate to take so much of time, but sometimes the story does more than a million words would. My wife and I were in a country where a Muslim guy who had come over from Iraq had crossed over. I don't know if you've heard me tell this story. And he said he used to make false passports for a living, and he learned how to kill without feeling. One day he had a dream about Jesus, that he was the way, the truth, and the life. 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. Every night he had the same dream, that Jesus was the way, the truth, and life. He went and told his mother. His mother said, "Don't you dare tell your brothers, they will kill you." He said, "I'm not becoming a Christian." She said, "I know, but don't tell them, they will kill you." 2 years, 3 years, he's having the same dream. She tells him to get out of the country. They're going to kill him. So he gets out. And he gets out of the country, and he comes to this other land where we had dinner with him one night. 7 years in a row, he has the same dream. And he meets up with this Christian businessman, and he says, "The hound of heaven is on your trail. He's following you." He committed his life to Jesus Christ. He was now studying in a seminary in that country, studying to prepare to go back to Iraq. I said, "How do you plan to get back?" He said, "I make passports." And he was planning to return. And what I have told you now, there are thousands of men and women who are finding Christ in those very similar situations. And I think if Islam needs to be taken seriously, they should give their people the freedom to believe or disbelieve. And when you compare the Quran with the Bible, many Muslims will tell you they don't understand most of the Quran. It's incomprehensible. A lot of it is incomprehensible. And there are many other reasons we could give you. But Allah and God in the Arabic is the same word. So you're really looking for two different attributes. And I would say Jesus said, to come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And I think the answers of Christ correspond with reality far more than either Muhammad's or anyone. Compare the two lives. Compare the two lives. I said to a Muslim in Indonesia, I said, if I came to you with multiple wives, one of whom was 9 or 11 years old, would you take me seriously that I had the answer to all of life? And he said, well, we have to think about these things. I don't understand it. We have to look at these things very seriously because it determines our destiny. I know those are strong words, but you have to look at the life of Christ and compare it with these others, and you will see the difference.
One final question that has a couple of parts, and then we will be done, we'll close. But if Christ's sacrifice was indeed unique, which is one question, then what about those who've never heard about his sacrifice? And what about those who've never heard about Jesus regarding their ultimate destiny and salvation?
In his talk to the Athenians, Paul says, the God who made the world and everything in it, the heaven and earth, does not live in temples. He's not served by human hands. From one man he made every nation of men that they should inhabit the whole earth. He determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. So God says that your placing in life where you were is well within his plan, and he's not far from any one of us in ways that he reveals himself. We just see it and hear it time and time again. You can be sure that he knows how he will judge each individual with fairness, because the Bible says right in the passage of Sodom and Gomorrah, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? But anyone who enters heaven will enter heaven because of the sacrifice of the blood of Christ, not because of their own merit or any intrinsic innocence of their own.
If today's program has been helpful for you in your understanding of truth, you might want to hear the entire Q&A presentation. You can order a copy by calling us at 1-800-448-6766. And when you call, be sure to ask for the title Woodmen Valley Q&A 2. To order online or to learn more about the ministry of RZIM, visit our website at rzim.org And if you're listening in Canada, that website is rzim.ca.
How does a man born in India become a world-renowned Christian apologist and philosopher? Ravi Zacharias tells in his highly acclaimed book, Walking from East to West.
Looking at it both from the Eastern perspective and the Western perspective, and what truly happens to a heart when Christ transforms all of your hopelessness into His hope and His meaning.
You can buy a copy of Walking from East to West at rzim.org.
Just Thinking is a listener-supported radio ministry and is furnished by Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, Atlanta, Georgia. Be sure to visit our website to find out more about our ministry or to discover ways you can partner with us as we strive to help the thinker believe and the believer think. Thanks for joining us this week. Tune in again on Monday for more truth and solid insight. Until then, keep thinking.